What family secret has been kept away from only you, and how did you find out about it? Story 1. I don't know if it quite counts as a family secret, but here goes. We had a cockroach problem when I was a kid. We kept putting down traps, spraying stuff around the house, but we could never figure out where they were coming from. Time went by, and they decided I needed a new mattress for my waterbed. We drained it, and my dad went to pull up the mattress. Suddenly, he started loudly freaking out. I was in a separate room, so they thought I didn't hear. But the roach nest was under my waterbed mattress. It had a pinhole leak, which apparently created the perfect environment for them. Since I wasn't in the room, all I was told was that something went wrong when he was draining it, and water sprayed everywhere. But I overheard them quietly talking about how that must be why I had so many sleeping problems. Cockroaches crawling on me while I was asleep. I try not to think about it too often. Story 2. My father's siblings and their families stopped talking to us after my grandmother, their mom, passed away in 2009. I was told they were just too busy working and doing their own thing to hang out like we all used to. On the rare occasions I would see them, I was always the first and only one to say hi and try to catch up. Around the time I turned 18 in 2014, I'm currently 22, I found out the real reason they cut us off. When my grandmother was dying and about to lose her house, my father stepped up and tried to convince his siblings to help save the house and contribute to her medical bills. They turned their backs on her and on my father, so my dad ended up buying the house himself and restoring it. After my grandmother passed, his siblings tried to claim their piece of mom's money, even though they hadn't done anything to help her. Since then, they've refused to associate with my father, mother, sister, or me. Story 3. I had two secrets. The first was that the grandfather I grew up with wasn't my biological grandfather. I learned this in my early 30s, after he had passed. My grandmother told me the night of his wake that he never got over his anger at the Catholic Church for refusing to marry them because she had already been married once. When I responded, "Wait, what?" she replied, "Oh, you didn't know Papa wasn't your biological grandfather? I guess you just learned something about yourself today." The second secret I learned just 2 months ago. My grandmother's first husband also wasn't my biological grandfather. My mother was actually the product of an affair. I discovered this via an Ancestry.com DNA test. My biological grandfather and uncle coincidentally took the same test and showed up as closely related. My new uncle contacted me, thinking he'd solved a different family mystery of his own. That's another story altogether. I asked my mom if she knew anything about the family. When she asked my grandma, my mom didn't know either. My grandma finally spilled the beans. It turns out my biological grandfather didn't know either. He seems like an interesting guy. My biological uncle is very nice, and everyone is now cool with it. My mom is even planning to meet her newly found brother next weekend. Story 4. My grandmother was the illegitimate daughter of a state assemblyman. I thought that was almost kind of cool, until I found out that he marked her as dead on her birth certificate and likely never acknowledged her. Years later, after her mother and sisters were killed, probably in a flu epidemic, he took her into his home. But she wasn't treated like family. Instead, she worked as a maid for him, his cruel wife, and their children. She stayed there until she met my grandfather at a barn dance, and she could finally leave the house. She was the sweetest, most generous small-town lady you could ever meet. You'd never guess she had such a difficult life in her youth. She never talked about it, and I don't think even her own children knew the whole story until she was in her 90s, when genealogy became a hobby for someone in the extended family. I sure do miss her. Story 5. I found out that the people I thought were my parents were actually my grandparents. My birth mother, who I grew up believing was my eldest sister, got pregnant at 14 and had me. She apparently wasn't ready or prepared to raise me, so my grandparents adopted me and raised me as their own. To me, they are my mom and dad, and they always will be. I was about 10 when I found out. It happened during a fight between my parents. There was a lot of shouting and drinks were involved. I was trying to calm them down when my dad let slip, "Well, why don't you go ask your real mother in town where she lives?" The way he said it, filled with venom, hurt. He stormed out, leaving just me and my mom. She sat me down and explained everything. She also told me that my sister wanted so little to do with me at one point that she literally left me on the doorstep and walked over me to go out for the night. The rest of my mom's family didn't approve of her taking me in. For that and other reasons, we moved across the country for a fresh start. We don't really talk to them anymore, for unrelated reasons. They're not nice people. My sister had another child later, someone I thought was my nephew but who's actually my half-brother. We were raised like brothers. I still miss those days when we'd play with my action figures and create elaborate plots and characters that lasted for days. Unfortunately, I don't see him much anymore since our family doesn't talk. I know my birth father's name, but I have no desire to meet him. I've been told he was a bit of a player and that I probably have a few more half-brothers scattered across the country. Well, that's my family secret. Thanks to anyone who read it. It feels good to get that off my chest. Story 6. When my health started declining, I asked my mom if we had any family history of issues related to the uterus. She snapped at me, saying, "I don't know anyone who has major pain because of periods. Maybe it's just you." Not long after, I was forced to move out, even though I couldn't work regularly and struggled with money because of my health. About a year later, I spoke with my aunt and learned that she has endometriosis. One of their sisters had fibromas, and another aunt on my dad's side struggled with cysts and endometriosis as well. My aunt also revealed that my dad dislikes her for her health issues, seeing her as pathetic and weak. That's why nobody in my family stepped in to help me. I confronted my parents about it, and they told me that if I needed help so badly, I could go see my aunts. After that, I was forbidden to talk about my health in the family home because it made my dad angry. I'm still in a blind rage over it. I can't explain why they didn't tell me or how they could be so selfish and cruel. Story 7. My parents forged my birth certificate and lied to me about my actual birth date until I was a teenager. When I was close to kindergarten age, my parents realized I was born 2 weeks too late to attend. My real birthday is September 15th, but the cutoff was September 1st. To them, it was unacceptable because they thought I was ready for school. They photocopied my birth certificate, covered the 5 and 15 with whiteout, made a new copy, and paid a family friend to notarize the fake document. The elementary school had no idea, so I started school early. To keep me from accidentally spilling the secret, they even celebrated my birthday on September 1st. I didn't find out until I turned 15 and applied for my driver's license permit. On the way to the DMV, my mom handed me my paperwork and my real birth certificate, rather anticlimactically, and waited for my reaction. It was a shock. Even 16 years later, I still say a little happy birthday to myself on my fake birthday. No one ever found out about the forgery, and I was homeschooled in high school anyway before getting my GED. Oh, and there's another twist. When I was 14, I overheard that my mom's knee surgery was actually a boob job. It was the worst kept secret ever. She went from tiny to porn star big. I had a lot of fun watching her pretend to limp around with an ace bandage on her knee when it was actually her chest that was hurting. Story 8. The secret kept from me was that my biological father is truly an amazing and upstanding man. Growing up, my mom told me horrible things about him, like that he tried to kill us and that her brothers wanted to take him into the woods. She said he left because he couldn't handle me, claiming he got angry when I was just learning to pull myself up. She painted him as a monster for not paying child support and for cutting off contact after remarrying and having more kids. Meanwhile, I spent years bawling my eyes out wanting a dad. The man she married later was terrible, and I constantly asked why my letters to my father were never answered. Now I know she probably never sent them. Her abuse only worsened my feelings of being unwanted. She made it clear even now that I was the biggest mistake of her life. She's the very definition of a toxic parent. 2 years ago, I finally reached out to my father. I'm so glad I did. My mom knew she'd lost control and started prying to find out what we were talking about. I confirmed everything through my maternal grandmother, who laid it all out for me. My father desperately wanted to be in my life. He even offered to pay my mom's rent so he could live next door. He sent gifts that I never received and tried multiple times to reach me. My paternal grandmother played a huge role in all of this. My mom allowed me to visit her, likely under an agreement to keep my father at a distance. Yet, in her will she passed last year, she ensured I received part of my father's inheritance. Her final attempt to reunite us worked. At my grandmother's funeral, I met my dad for the first time that I can remember. His wife and my aunt told me how much he felt lost without me and how there was a giant hole in his heart. They shared what he couldn't say to me in words. The sudden stop in child support and contact should have signaled to my mom that something was seriously wrong, and she probably knew. My dad's then wife struggled mentally and wanted him to have no contact with me. Despite that, he used secret accounts and payphones just to send what he could. He tried so hard. I learned all of this at 27/28. It's changed how I view my life, though my feelings of being unwanted are deeply rooted and still affect me socially. But now I know where I belong, with my dad's family. I feel loved and valued by everyone but my mom, and that's an amazing feeling. Story 9. I found out my dad was married before he met my mom, and that my brother and I have a half-sister. I learned this because my sister found me on MySpace. My mom claimed she knew about the marriage, but not the daughter. In the mid-2000s, I got a MySpace message asking personal questions. I ignored it, assuming it was a scam. But then I got another message that seemed legit. I still told them to leave me alone. That's when the person said she thought we were related. I laughed because I thought it was a clever scam, especially since the person looked Asian, probably Korean. I'm definitely not Asian. After more back and forth, she asked to call me. I figured, what do I have to lose? I was expecting a money request. Instead, the caller shocked me. She knew my name, my brother's name, my mom's name, and, most importantly, my estranged father's name. Her voice was oddly familiar, but I couldn't place it. It turned out my dad had been in the army overseas where he met a local woman, fell in love, married her, and had a kid. They divorced, and his ex and daughter moved back overseas. Then he met my mom, did almost the same thing, and had me and my brother. He never told my mom about the daughter, so we never knew about our sister. My sister came back to the U.S. for school. Her family told her she had 2 younger brothers in the city we lived in. When she started her own family, she wanted to know us. That's when she tracked me down on MySpace. The same day I spoke to my sister, she gave me the number of our paternal grandmother, who I hadn't talked to since I was a toddler. Near the end of my work shift, I called her. An old woman with a southern accent answered. I introduced myself, and before I could say much, she said, "I love you so much. I never stopped thinking about you and your brother, and I always prayed I would get this phone call." That day marked the beginning of my relationship with my sister, my grandmother, and our extended family. Despite the miles between us, we share strikingly similar personality traits, mannerisms, and features. My grandmother was the glue that held us all together and helped foster these relationships. She passed away this year, but her memory lives on strongly with her kids, grandkids, great-grandkids, and even great-great-grandkids. Story 10. A great uncle of mine, now deceased, was involved in a high-stakes legal case that reached the Supreme Court and created case law. The case was even adapted into a plotline for The Sopranos. I stumbled upon this while researching my family history on Google to trace their immigration history and claim Polish nationality for working and residence rights in Europe. My great-uncle, an Orthodox Jew living in the United States, made a binding promise when he married his wife. In order to divorce, they would need to do it formally in a religious ceremony at a synagogue. Under Jewish law, without this ceremony, they weren't technically divorced, and neither party could remarry. After 22 years of marriage, they divorced in a civil court. However, my great-uncle refused to participate in the religious divorce, leaving his ex-wife in a state of marital limbo. She later met another man she wanted to marry, but couldn't have a Jewish ceremony without the get, the formal document for a religious divorce. Desperate to move on, she took him to court to compel him to grant the religious divorce. And that's when everything blew up. The case became so significant that it set legal precedent and made waves in religious and legal communities, eventually becoming a source of inspiration for a storyline in The Sopranos. Story 11. My grandmother recently passed away. At her wake, a woman I had never seen before showed up and spent a lot of time chatting with my uncle. The same uncle who's 62, never married, and whom I always assumed was gay but not open about it, likely because of my grandmother. Naturally, I figured this woman was just a close friend. Turns out she was my uncle's first love. Many years ago, they fell in love, and he decided he wanted to marry her. When he told my grandmother, she forbade it because the woman was Jewish, and we are not. Yeah, I know. So he broke it off. Fast forward 40-plus years, and they are still close. She never married either. So not only is my uncle apparently not gay, but he's also exceptionally good at holding a grudge. I'm no longer hoping that he secretly has a boyfriend somewhere. Now I'm secretly hoping that the two of them have been holding out all this time and can finally find their happiness together. Story 12. A friend of my dad's committed suicide in front of him. My mom told me about it years ago, but I didn't hear the full story until this Christmas when my dad finally shared it with me. It happened in the 1960s in Mexico, when my dad was about 16. Between classes, they had a couple of free hours to go anywhere. That day, my dad and some friends went to one kid's house. This kid came from a wealthy family, but months earlier, his little brother had been hit by a car. It was serious, so his parents sent him to Houston, Texas for better care. His mom stayed with the brother, his dad worked constantly, and the kid had the house to himself. They were at that age where smoking cigarettes and drinking coffee felt cool, so that's what they were doing in the living room. The kid said, "Hang on, let me show you something cool," and went upstairs. He came back down with a revolver. At first, he pointed it at my dad and the others, pulled the trigger, and nothing happened. The gun was empty. It scared them, but they thought he was joking. Then he pulled out a bullet, put it in the chamber, spun it, and closed the gun. He put it to his head, pulled the trigger. Click. Nothing. But then they saw him pull the hammer back again, cycling the bullet into the chamber and do it a second time. This time there was a loud bang. My dad described the blood and white stuff splattering behind him like a party popper, so much so that at first they thought it was another joke. His body fell limp behind the couch, out of view. When he didn't get up, they looked over and saw blood spurting from the hole in his head. One of the kids ran across the street to get his mom, who was a nurse, but it was too late. My dad spent the rest of the day being interviewed by police. Eventually, they were let go when it was clear they had nothing to do with it. He still has no idea why the kid did it. Part of him thinks it was to show how macho he was, being a year younger and always trying to prove himself. What's truly messed up is that my dad never received any psychological help for what he saw. That just wasn't done back then. You were expected to live past it. I'm amazed my dad turned out to be such a great man after experiencing something so traumatic at such a young age. Story 13. I found out my mom was almost forced to abort me by my grandmother. While my mom was married to my dad, she cheated on him with his best friend, after my dad had cheated with a woman from another state. This led to me having a half-sister I didn't know about until I was 20. Anyway, my mom got pregnant, and the best friend claimed the baby. My dad was furious, and my grandmother was even worse. The first time around, my grandmother forced my mom to get an abortion. Everything settled down for a while, but my mom disappeared on a hiatus, and it turned out she was pregnant again. Everyone assumed the baby was the best friend's, but this time my dad stepped in. He claimed me as his own, which infuriated my grandmother. She was worried about what people in the community would think of her family, so she demanded another abortion. My dad wasn't having it. He blew up, defended me, and, in a show of spite, did donuts in my grandmother's front yard. I only found out about all of this on a camping trip when I had a couple of beers with my dad. Turns out my brother had known for years because my mom told him and asked him not to mention it. To make things even weirder, my brother and I were both raised by our grandparents, so Thanksgiving dinners have been incredibly awkward ever since. Story 14. I found out my grandfather was one of the biggest racists in our state. I never knew until earlier this year when my grandmother died, and I Googled her name to find the funeral home directions. That's when I stumbled upon information about him. He died when I was 3, and even then I didn't like him. I couldn't explain why. He was small, angry, and dissatisfied with his life. Turns out he was arrested for trying to incite a race riot in the late 1960s. There are pictures of him in books where he's called the #1 racist in the state. He even started a Nazi party in the 1950s, like WTF. World War II had just ended. How did that seem like a good idea? Our last name is very rare, and I'm honestly surprised no one has come after me because of him. When I showed my dad the evidence, he was in total denial. Oh, he didn't hate black people, he just hated communists. He said this while looking at a photo of my grandfather holding a sign that said, "Blacks out now." It wasn't until after my grandmother's funeral that my mom and her mother confirmed he was a terrible person. I had to wait 40 years to hear this. I live in a very diverse city, and most of my coworkers aren't white. I've worked alongside older black men for years, and I'm still amazed none of them connected the dots with my last name. For the record, no, I'm not a racist. I worked hard to purge any remnants of hate from my life. I don't judge people for things they can't control, like race, religion, or sexuality. I only judge people for things they can control, like driving too slow in the passing lane. That's a universal crime, no matter your race. Story 15. Not exactly my secret alone, but I found out that one of my cousin's dad isn't really his biological father, and he doesn't know. It happened during a trip to Mexico. His mom was oddly protective of his passport the whole time. For context, my cousin is a U.S. citizen, but for some reason his mom forced him into ESL classes his entire life. Even though she speaks fluent English, he doesn't. Not a word. During the trip, all of the cousins were passing through immigration and customs together, and my aunt handed me his passport, telling me not to give it back to him or show it to him. When I looked at it, I was shocked. His last name wasn't his dad's. I always thought it was. Later, I told my sister and other cousins about it, and apparently they already knew. My mom also told me not to say anything to my cousin. I guess I was the last one to learn this secret. The sad part is that my cousin firmly believes his current dad is his biological dad. I can only assume that his mom intentionally kept him from learning English to prevent him from discovering the truth. It's pretty tough to see him now, as he's in his 30s and still relies on his mom to translate paperwork when opening credit cards or bank accounts. It's odd. You'd think living in the US for over 30 years, you'd eventually pick up English, but he hasn't. I wonder if he'll ever learn the truth. Story 16. My parents split up when I was 8 years old. My dad had been having an affair, but I was too young to understand, so they told me it was because of money issues. I have two much older sisters who always hated my dad, and I never understood why. I was very close to him, even after the split. I went on holidays with my dad and the woman he had the affair with, and he would regularly come over for dinner. My mom would cook for him, something I now realize was completely messed up. Over the years, my family assumed I had pieced it together. My mom passed away when I was 15, and when I was 18, I finally plucked up the courage to ask my dad. He confirmed it. I've since forgiven him, but what still kills me is that I never got the chance to talk to my mother about it. She went through so much just to make sure I had a good relationship with my father. It may not have been the right way to handle things, but it's the most unselfish thing I've ever witnessed. I wish I could thank her for it. Story 17. I have an enormous family and live in a decently sized city. My cousins, my nieces, who are my age, and I all ended up at the same small private school. When I was 13, we were at dinner one night, and one of my nieces casually mentioned that one of our cousins was spreading rumors about me. Apparently, our cousin was saying I was adopted. I went home and told my mom about it. She immediately denied it, and we never spoke about it again. But not long after, I started learning about genetics in my 8th grade science class. Naturally, I began asking questions about why I didn't look like my parents. A few months later, my mom got pretty hammered one night. My dad wasn't home, and it was just the two of us in the house. She came into my room and, out of nowhere, confessed that I was adopted. I have 5 siblings and a huge extended family. As it turns out, everyone who was old enough to remember my adoption had been told not to tell me. My parents had planned to tell me together when I turned 18, but because of ongoing family drama with this cousin's side, I suspect my cousin was told for other reasons, even though they wouldn't have been old enough to remember my adoption directly. I'm 21 now and I'm still processing it. At 13, I suppressed it for a long time, but recently, it started to resurface in my mind. I guess it's something I'm still trying to fully come to terms with. Story 18. I learned that the relationship between my grandparents on my dad's side was deeply unhealthy. My grandfather could be violent toward my grandmother, and the only reason she stayed with him was for the sake of her children. On top of that, my aunt accused my grandfather of sexual assault years ago. He denied it, but my dad and his sister supported her at the time. After my grandfather passed away, my aunt began retracting her accusation. Now, she neither confirms nor denies it. My dad was left feeling shocked and conflicted, hurt that he might have wrongly accused his father of such a terrible thing, without the chance to talk it through or make amends. From that experience, my dad internalized the belief that the worst thing that could happen to a father is to be falsely accused of sexual assault by his daughter. Because of this fear, when I, his daughter, started hitting puberty and developing a feminine figure, he decided to stop showing me emotional and physical affection altogether. The result was a distant, cold relationship that felt more like a strict business arrangement. The only conversations we had were about school or my career. I was left broken, constantly questioning why my dad was so distant and unloving. I tried to reach out to him in different ways, but he always shut me down, and our interactions often turned into fights. Eventually, I just stopped trying. When I turned 18, on Christmas night around 11 p.m., he sat me down and told me the truth about why he had been so distant all those years. That's how I found out why I never had a healthy relationship with him. Now at 21, things are a little better between us, but it's still far from where it should be. I don't know if it ever will be. Story 19. As the youngest of 2 siblings, by 5 years, I was kept in the dark about most things growing up. Everything I've learned about my family has been because someone let it slip or forgot they never told me. I used to go to my sister, thinking I had breaking news, only for her to respond with, "Oh, you didn't know about that? Here's what I've pieced together. I have a half-brother. My mom had a child before meeting my dad, gave him up for adoption, and swore my dad to secrecy. I only found out when the half-brother tracked down my mom and reached out to us. Turns out he's way more put together than me and my sister combined. My sister was molested, first by our neighbors across the street and later by our uncle, our mom's brother-in-law. The time she punched him in the face at Christmas? Yeah, that wasn't an accident. She told me during her heavy drinking years. My mom may have died as a result of domestic violence. While my parents were going through a divorce, my mom had a boyfriend who was physically abusive. Dad told me this after the guy died. He did his own research and found out the boyfriend had a history of domestic violence, and that another one of his girlfriends had died under suspicious circumstances. My grandfather, who was conscripted into the German army during World War II, wasn't actually German. He was a Slovakian Jew. I only found this out when he died last year. My cousin, the one who constantly made jokes about his big Jew nose, dragged the truth out of the family after relentless prodding. At this point, I'm not sure what else my family is hiding. I just know I'll probably be the last to find out. Story 20. My mom had 2 kids, a son and a daughter, from a previous marriage. After she got with my dad, she had 3 more kids, including me, and we moved to the U.S. Her older kids stayed behind with their dad in Mexico. That alone was a family secret for a long time. But eventually, us 3 younger kids learned that we had half-siblings. I've met my half-siblings a couple of times and have as much of a relationship as I can with them, given that we didn't grow up together. Strangely enough, I feel closer to them than I do to my 2 full brothers. Fast forward to just me and my mom going to Mexico to visit family. Of course, we visited my half-siblings. While we were there, I couldn't help but notice how much my older full brother and my older half-brother look alike. They're a few years apart, but could practically be twins. Then we ran into my mom's ex-husband, small-town problems, and that's when I realized something crazy. My 2 older brothers are spitting images of him. My mom visibly freaked out and quickly made us leave. Once we were back home and I had time to let it all sink in, I blatantly asked my mom if her ex-husband was my older brother's father. She admitted it. My dad adopted him as an infant after he and my mom got together, and he's raised him as his own ever since. My older brother doesn't know. My parents don't want him to, and honestly, I think it's for the best. Story 21. I've never publicly shared this, and to my knowledge, many people still think I don't know. My dad was in the military and deployed when my mom got pregnant by another man. They weren't married yet, and when my dad returned, my mom told him what happened. Despite everything, he still wanted to marry her and be the father of the baby. He even signed the birth certificate, so legally he's the dad. 2 years later, I was born. Fast forward to about 8 years ago. I was 40, and my sister was 42. My mom and I were having dinner, just catching up, when she told me the story. She made me promise never to tell my dad because it would devastate him if he knew I knew. About a year later, my sister passed away after a long battle with cancer. While she lay in her hospital bed, slipping away, I caught my mom starting to confess the truth to her. I made her stop. I took her outside and told her that it wasn't fair to lay something like that on my sister at the very end of her life. I think I made the right decision. In the years since, I've talked to a couple of cousins and an aunt. They all knew. Turns out my sister and I were the only ones who didn't. My dad still doesn't know that I know, but I wish I could talk to him about it. What he did, stepping up and raising my sister as his own, is something he should be proud of. My parents stayed together, gave us a great childhood, and always provided what we needed. Sure, they have their faults, as do I, but we were, and still are, a family. Story 22. When I was 7 years old, my dad had an affair with his boss's secretary, and they had a son together. My parents got divorced because of it, but both families agreed to keep the secret from me. The whole situation was bizarre. My dad and I essentially shared a schedule. I stayed with him on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and he stayed with me on Mondays and Wednesdays. Same room, same bed, same toys. Meanwhile, my brother always knew about me, but my dad kept telling him that I was too busy to meet him or talk to him. My dad had told his family that sleeping with my brother's mom was a one-time thing, and that she'd use the baby to trap him into child support. Because of this, his family shunned my brother and his mom. But when my brother was 13, my dad finally confessed to his dad, my grandfather, that the affair had been ongoing for a long time. He even admitted he had plans to marry my brother's mom at one point. After that, my grandfather decided to reconnect with my brother and his family, and they actually became quite close. Unfortunately, my grandfather passed away a couple of years later. Since they had reconciled, my brother and his family wanted to attend the funeral. At this point, I was 22 and my brother was 15. I had moved out of state after college and was planning to come back for the funeral. My dad, for some reason, kept trying to convince me not to come. When he realized he couldn't stop me, he finally broke down and said, "Hey, I just wanted to tell you that you actually have a 15-year-old brother. craziest moment of my life. Story 23. About 10 years ago, I found out I have an older sister, and apparently, everyone in the family knew except me. I learned about it when my uncle passed away. Before he died, he told his kids to make sure I knew the truth and the full story. It turns out my father's siblings had wanted to tell me since I turned 18, but they never got the chance because my mother was always around. And here's where things get crazy. My father had raised kids that weren't biologically his, though he never saw them as anything but his children. However, when his own biological daughter reached out to him to reconnect, my mother flat out refused to let him meet her. She threatened that if he did, she would leave him, take the rest of us kids, and he would never see us again. In my 30s, I finally met my older sister, my father's other daughter. My father never got to meet her because he had passed away almost 6 years earlier. When I calmed down enough to confront my mother about it, she looked me straight in the eye and lied. Later, I needed to obtain my long-form birth certificate, and when I looked at it, no father was listed. I look exactly like my father, so there's no doubt he's biologically mine. But the absence of his name made my mother's threats all the more powerful. He wouldn't have had legal rights to us. When I asked my mother about the missing name on my birth certificate, she lied about that too. Now I can't help but wonder how many other lies she's told and how many more secrets she's still hiding. Story 24. I grew up in a household where my mother was married to my brother and sister's father, not mine. I never knew my own father. My mother always told me he was just another deadbeat dad who left as soon as he found out she was pregnant. I believed this story until I turned 16. At that point, I was sent to live with my grandmother. My mother had divorced my sibling's father and had a new boyfriend, but we butted heads a lot. It was easier for me to just live with my grandmother. One day I went to the kitchen to make lunch, and I overheard my grandmother on the phone. She was talking to a family member whose daughter had gotten pregnant by some guy who wasn't any good. My grandmother said something that made my stomach drop. Well, if she's committed to having the child and refuses an abortion, just tell the boy the child died at birth. Remember? Like we did for Preston when Dovaba was born. Obviously, she didn't use my actual name, but you get the idea. I froze. I was horrified. Everyone in my family knew the truth about my father, and they had all lied to me my entire life. I was raised being beaten and neglected by my sibling's father, and that was what they chose for me instead of letting me know about the other side of my family? I confronted everyone about it, and they gave me the usual sob story about how it was for the better. It went in one ear and out the other. Nothing they said, or could ever say, would make me change how I feel about their lies. After that confrontation, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I looked up my father on MySpace. Facebook wasn't quite as big yet back then. Found my aunt through his page, and eventually met her. My father lived in another state, so I couldn't meet him right away. Finally, in 2016, shortly after I turned 24, I met my dad. Story 25. I have a couple of family secrets. The first one, I never knew my biological father, or as I call him, the sperm donor. I was old enough when my mother married to know that her husband was my stepfather. He treated me harshly, very differently from my sisters, and any positive interactions between us were clearly forced by my mother. One snowy day, I was playing with some friends, and when we went back to their grandmother's house, she completely ignored them and started asking me 1,000 questions, acting very weird. When I got home, I told my mom about it. That's when she sat me down and dropped the bomb. My biological father was her best friend's husband's brother. Those kids I was playing with, they were my cousins. That woman acting strange, she was actually my grandmother. Turns out my biological father is someone pretty famous. He owns the largest wild animal sanctuary in Colorado, and he's frequently on TV and in the news, hailed as a hero for rescuing big cats, wolves, and bears. His sanctuary is in eastern Colorado, and most locals have heard of or even visited it. He even had a show on Animal Planet called Growing Up Panther. One day I randomly watched an episode with my coworkers at work, having no idea who he really was. The story is that my mom got pregnant after just a few dates. She told him that she didn't like the way his family treated each other and gave him a choice. He could be part of my life, or he could walk away. He showed up for my birth, but never came back. Later, I learned that one of his sons from his new family had recently committed suicide. Maybe my mom was right to keep me out of all that. The second secret. In my early 20s, my uncle committed suicide. He had been a heavy alcoholic, but I wanted to understand what pushed him to that point. My grandma, on my mom's side, the most incredible, kind, and driven person I've ever known, finally told me the truth. I never knew my grandfather, and I'd never asked about him. It turns out my uncle caught him beating my grandmother multiple times when he was in his early 20s. He told my grandfather that if he ever caught him doing it again, he would kill him. One day, my uncle walked in on his father strangling my grandmother. She was bloodied and beaten. My uncle grabbed a knife, stabbed him, and killed him. He was charged with homicide but was eventually acquitted. Still, that trauma haunted him for the rest of his life, and he turned to alcohol to cope. It breaks my heart that he struggled so much, but I'm so grateful he saved my grandma. Without him, who knows what would have happened? Story 26. I found out over a decade ago that my sweet, beloved father had attempted suicide when I was a baby. It was my sister, his stepdaughter, who let it slip during a conversation. More recently, my other sister, also his stepdaughter, revealed that he had made another suicide attempt when I was a young child. Learning about both of these incidents was deeply shocking. My parents divorced by the time I was 3, and while I have memories of their marriage being incredibly rocky, I also remember feeling relieved when they separated. Despite their divorce, my dad was always in my life. He is, and always has been, an exceptional father. Some of my happiest memories are from the times I spent with him. We'd take long drives through the countryside, exploring beautiful rural landscapes. I remember how in awe he'd always be of the natural beauty around us, like he was seeing the world through a new lens every time. It breaks my heart to know he suffered so much back then, silently carrying the weight of his depression. I've had my own struggles with depression, so I know how it feels. And imagining my dad going through that pain is almost unbearable. Today, he's almost 75, and while he still has depressive episodes, particularly with age and health issues catching up to him, he's still here. I love my dad so much. He's a good man, one of the best people I know. I'm so grateful he's still in my life. Story 27. My grandmother, my mother's mother, died when I was 12. Up until I was 22, I never knew how she died. I just knew that her husband found her on the couch one day, thinking she was napping. At 22, I found out the truth. She committed suicide because my grandfather had been cheating on her, and she was struggling with severe depression. What shocked me even more was learning about the strained relationship between her and my mom. My grandmother even left a suicide note where she expressed how much she hated my mom and said she didn't want my mom to touch anything that belonged to her. My mom knows about the note, but my dad won't let her read it. Apparently my mom's sister has it, and one day I might read it myself. I only learned all this because my mom let it slip during a casual conversation, not realizing no one had ever told me before. When I asked my older sister about it, she said, "I didn't want you to know," like she had been protecting me. It made me so angry. When exactly was I supposed to be told? Was I just supposed to go my whole life not knowing? My sister is only a year and a half older than me. Why did she get to know and not me? It's things like this that make me wonder what else I haven't been told. What other family secrets are out there, hiding in the shadows, about people who have disappeared from my life? Story 28. I always thought my grandfather was a war hero. He fought in WWI as a machine gunner during the ill-fated Gallipoli campaign. One day, a mortar exploded, and he took a ball bearing to the shoulder. He was sent to recover at the rear. After that, he managed to transfer to the Royal Flying Corps. He served as a gunner observer in Re-8S, for those who know old planes, and eventually became an aerial gunnery instructor. He told me once with pride that he trained the future British ace, Albert Ball. That's where my knowledge of his military service ended. I knew he later met my grandmother in Central America, and that was it. Then, when I was around 60 years old, I visited my 80-something aunt. Somehow we got to talking about her father, and she bitterly revealed something that floored me. My grandfather had been dishonorably discharged. Apparently, at some point, he was teaching basic riflery. A recruit presented a cleaned and reassembled rifle for inspection, and my grandfather asked if it was loaded. "No, sir," came the reply. My grandfather took the rifle and it fired, killing the recruit. For those who know guns, this could only have happened if the bolt had been opened, a cartridge chambered, and the hammer cocked. Perhaps that's why he asked if it was loaded. But why would he pull the trigger with the rifle pointed at someone? The first lesson in gun safety is to never point a weapon at anything you don't intend to shoot. Afterward, he was court-martialed, convicted of negligence causing death, and made to stand at attention while his rank and badges were torn from his uniform. My aunt described it as a humiliating public ritual. I couldn't believe it. I had seen him many times wearing a blazer with the RFC badge proudly pinned to the chest pocket. To have gone through such a traumatic event and still wear that emblem, it left me with so many unanswered questions. I'll never know the full truth. Story 29. This is one of my dad's secrets, one he didn't tell me himself. My mom let it slip to my sister when she was drunk, and my sister told me during a moment of anger and anxiety. Before my mom and dad were together, my dad had an affair with a married woman. She ended up getting pregnant, broke things off with my dad, and patched things up with her husband. To my knowledge, she never told her husband about the affair. The baby, a boy, was raised as her husband's child. That's all we know. My mom revealed this shortly before my dad passed away because he had been feeling guilty about not being involved in his biological son's life. My sister sometimes talks about tracking him down, not to fix anything, but just because it feels so strange knowing we have a sibling out there we've never met. I can't bring myself to do that, though. The man must be in his 40s or even 50s now. I can't imagine turning his life upside down. What would we even say? Hey, surprise, the man you thought was your father wasn't, and your biological dad is dead. It feels so unfair. I've mostly accepted that I'll never know this brother, and he'll never know about me. But sometimes it still weirds me out. Knowing there's someone out there, a stranger who shares my blood, but has no idea I exist. Story 30. My parents were extremely physically, verbally, and emotionally abusive. When I was an infant in the early 80s, I was the victim of a medical malpractice incident, and my parents received around $75,000 from the resulting lawsuit. Growing up, they always told me the money had gone to pay for my medical expenses and that they got shafted in the settlement. By the time I was 16, I had decided to leave the family the moment I turned 18 and never looked back. Life at home was unbearable. I was kicked, spat on, loudly called a whore in church, and shamed in every way possible to control me through fear, guilt, and physical abuse. One day, my mom was at the kitchen table and decided to spill the truth. She thought my uncle had told me. He hadn't, but she's still mad at him to this day. Turns out there was more money, a lot more. When I turned 18, the money would be mine, and she hoped I would do the right thing and reimburse them the $75,000 they'd spent on my medical bills. She also insisted that I put the rest back into a trust, so I wouldn't spend it all. The irony was that my parents never taught me how to manage money. They lived paycheck to paycheck, spending every dime they earned, and often borrowing from family members to get by. When I turned 18, I finally met the man who had been managing my trust for my entire life. An absolute first-rate professional. Much to my parents' frustration, I refused to allow them into the meetings. I laid everything out on the table for him, and he helped me secure my future. He made sure I received financial training, helped me pay for college, buy a car, and eventually purchase my first home. Most importantly, he made sure my parents would never see a cent of the money, and they never have. And the $75,000 they claimed to have spent on my medical bills? Turns out my dad blew it all on cocaine. Today, I have a successful career, a loving home, and a wonderful family of my own. I've spent a lot of time in therapy, and I'm very well adjusted. Money can't buy happiness, but it can bring you security. Story 31. I've always known I had an older brother who passed away due to complications at birth. I don't remember exactly when I found out, but I've known for as long as I can recall. My mom never showed me any photos of him, but one day my aunt revealed a framed picture. Apparently, everyone had shown up to meet the baby, so they took photos with him before they said their goodbyes. Here's where things get strange. My brother's birthday and mine are exactly the same. Same day, same month, just 1 year apart. I always thought it was weird, but over time I brushed it off as a coincidence. That is, until I found my vaccination record booklet. It stated that I was born early via C-section, and something just didn't sit right with me. I started to wonder about the circumstances around my birth. What really confirmed my suspicions, though, were the initials. My brother and I have almost identical initials. My parents literally changed only the first letter, flipping it to the opposite end of the alphabet. It wasn't until this year that I fully confirmed what I had always suspected. I was a do-over baby. I decided to casually ask my grandmother why she had suggested my name to my mom. She told me it was because it was a strong name and because of my brother. That hit hard. Then my sister added another layer to the story. She mentioned how I was the only planned child out of the 5 of us, and I wasn't even the last. Later, while we were playfully insulting each other, she called me a replacement. That was it. It fully confirmed what I'd been piecing together my whole life. I spent 18 years wondering if I was meant to replace my brother. Now, I know for sure. Even my name isn't truly mine. It feels like it was given to me to fill the hole he left. People don't understand why I want to change my name, but to me, it doesn't belong to me. It's just another reminder that I wasn't born for me. I was born to replace someone else. Story 32. Everyone seems to be sharing dark secrets. So here's a heartwarming one. My mother and father split when I was 3. It was mutual. They were 20 and 23, and my dad told my mom, "My life isn't good right now. I have no job, no savings, and it's best for all three of us if you take me." It turned out to be the best thing they ever did. My parents were never on bad terms while I was growing up, and I was always allowed to visit my dad whenever I wanted. Still, he wasn't really there for me like a father should be. That role went to my stepfather, and he became my dad. I've lived in Japan for 4 years now. When I first moved here, every conversation with my father went the same way. "So, when are you coming back?" I'd tell him, "Don't know. When I know my next plan, I'll tell you." But he kept asking, every single month, every conversation, until I finally snapped. I told him that it wasn't going to change until I said otherwise. He got angry and we stopped talking. It's been almost 3 years since we last spoke. Since then, I've met the most wonderful woman. We've been dating for almost 3 years, and things are getting serious. We moved halfway across Japan together for new jobs and a fresh start. Now we're leaving Japan in April to move to New Zealand together. Exciting times. Here's where the happy secret comes in. This past holiday season, my mother, grandmother, on my father's side, and my stepbrother came to visit me in Japan. We were at a simple restaurant after a few drinks when my grandmother suddenly asked if I'd heard from my father. I said, "Nope, not since 2015. Then she asked if I knew that my father had been buying up all of my grandfather's children's movie collection for my children. My girlfriend sitting beside me smiled and thanked her politely. Little does she know that my grandfather has every children's movie ever made, including Disney classics dating back to the 1960s. Altogether, it's worth close to $5,000. Hearing that broke me. I immediately started crying and couldn't stop for nearly 10 minutes. It was the most heartwarming thing I've ever felt from my father. He missed so much. My high school and university graduations, my state-level championships, my birthdays, and even me leaving the country to live halfway across the world. And yet, this gesture showed me that, in his own quiet way, he still cares. Story 33. Almost 2 years ago, my family found out that my grandmother, my mother's mother, had a daughter before my mom, who we all thought was her eldest. Here's how we found out. My grandmother and my aunt were driving somewhere, and my aunt was opening and reading mail aloud for my grandmother as she drove. One of the letters included a handwritten note and a photo from a new aunt we didn't even know existed. The story goes like this. When my grandmother was fresh out of high school, she got pregnant with her boyfriend at the time. She knew he wasn't the man she wanted to spend her life with, but since it was the early 1960s in rural New York, abortion wasn't an option. She went to her priest for advice, and he connected her with an organization that would help her keep the pregnancy secret. They placed her with a family in another town, where she would help out around the house in exchange for their help. To everyone else, she said she'd gotten a job in that town. It was an hour and a half away, much longer back then, since the main road hadn't even been built yet, so no one visited. A few weeks into her pregnancy, she wrote a letter to her parents explaining everything. From that point on, my great-grandparents visited her every Sunday. To this day, her siblings would joke that my great-grandparents must have loved her the most because they visited her in the big city every week. When she had the baby, they whisked it away, and she chose not to keep in contact. She moved back home, met my grandfather, and started the family we all knew about. But every year on the baby's birthday, she went to church and prayed for her happiness. For decades, the only people who knew about her first baby were my great-grandparents and my grandfather. Now the secret is out, and watching my family's reactions has been priceless. My great-aunts and uncles have all been shocked, saying, "How did I not know?" But everyone has been accepting and supportive. Even better, I now have a new aunt and uncle and 2 new cousins. We've already met them, and they've attended several family functions, including our yearly reunion. It feels like they've always been part of the family. It's amazing how something that was a secret for so long could turn into something so positive. Story 34. When my mom and dad divorced, things got really vicious between them. I was only about 18 months old at the time, so I don't remember any of it. Last June, my dad was staying with my husband and me for our wedding. During that time, I asked him about why he and my mom got divorced. That's when he told me something I had never expected. My mom had spread rumors that he had sexually abused me and my sister during the divorce proceedings. I was stunned. I spent years in therapy as a child, not knowing that much of it was to screen for evidence of abuse. Spoiler, there was none. My dad never did anything inappropriate to either of us. Looking back, there were clues. When I was a teenager, my maternal aunt used to make vague hints about very terrible things my dad had done. I always assumed she was talking about something like depression or maybe a suicide attempt. I never imagined it was anything like what I now know. The saddest part of all this is that my mom passed away when I was 5, long before the allegations were disproven or before she could admit that she was lying. That left it to the therapist to clear my dad's name, which they did, but the damage had already been done. My maternal side of the family has spent all these years believing that my dad is a child abuser. It's heartbreaking because my dad is one of the most innocent and kind souls I've ever met. I could never in my life imagine him being capable of something like that, knowing that he carried this shadow over his name for so long, and that so many people believe something so awful about him. Breaks my heart for him. I'm just glad I know the truth now. He didn't deserve any of that. Story 35. This is a bit hard to follow, but here goes. My mother got pregnant with me because she was trying to get my father to marry her. When she told him about the pregnancy, he thought she was lying and threw money at her to get an abortion before leaving. My grandma convinced my mother to keep me, telling her that she would help take care of me because I was special. Not long after, my mother met a young sailor who couldn't have kids and married him when she was 8 months pregnant. She wanted to make sure I wouldn't be born illegitimate and probably hoped they could make it work. But when I was born, I had 4 inches of blonde hair, a clear sign I looked like my biological father. My mother realized right then that I would always be a constant reminder of what she considered her stupidity. After I was born, I went home with my grandparents and lived with them until I was 6 years old. I didn't find out the truth until I was 12. The man listed as my father on my birth certificate wasn't actually my biological father. At 14, I finally met my biological father for the first time. My mother had always told me I was the product of an affair and that she was the other woman. I believed her for years. Then a couple of years ago, my little brother found my dad and stepmom's marriage license. It showed they got married a year after I was born, not a year before, as I had always been told. That discovery turned everything I thought I knew on its head. Story 36. For my 10th birthday, I didn't get many presents. Just a couple of baseball cards and maybe a hat. I was a little disappointed, but I knew we didn't have much to spend that year, so I tried to make the best of it. Later that day, my mom asked me to grab something from the basement. As soon as I walked down, the first thing I saw was a brand new 10-speed bike. I bolted back upstairs yelling, "You guys got me a new bike! I knew cards and a hat wasn't all you got me!" That bike became my bike for the next 10 years. I rode it all over town, took it with me to college, and eventually, it just rusted out from so much use. But I loved that bike. Fast forward to Christmas when I was 25. My family and I were reminiscing, telling stories about mix-ups and people mistaking things, and how sometimes you just don't have the heart to tell someone the truth. My mom told a funny story about a gift mix-up with my grandmother. Everyone was laughing until my sister suddenly yelled out, "Just like that time with me's bike." Confused, I asked, "What bike?" That's when my family all went quiet and gave me blank stares. My mom finally said, "Oh my gosh, we never told him." Apparently my dad had put that bike on layaway at Kmart for himself and had been making payments on it for 6 months. When I found it in the basement on my birthday, everyone assumed he'd bought it as a surprise for me. It was never meant to be my bike. But once I ran upstairs so excited, no one had the heart to tell me the truth. Turns out my dad never ended up buying another bike for himself. Story 37. After my sister got married, her husband suddenly got really busy. For several months, he wasn't showing up at family events, and we were all told he was working a lot. Then one day, my sister's best friend, who worked with my best friend, mentioned something odd. Out of the blue, my best friend asked me if my sister's husband was in jail. I scoffed at the idea, thinking it was ridiculous. But that weekend, my brother-in-law missed another really important family event, again because he was working. That's when I finally confronted my sister. It turned out my brother-in-law was in jail for molesting his younger sister when they were kids. As part of her healing process and therapy, his sister decided to pursue charges. Since my brother-in-law was over 18 the last few times it happened, he agreed to go to jail for his actions. My sister described it to me as playing doctor that went too far. He ended up serving 6 months of a 1-year sentence. What made this even more disturbing was that my sister knew about all of this before they got married, and so did their church. The church let them marry in good standing, only excommunicating him 2 weeks later when he officially entered jail. To maintain appearances, of course. Later, after he got out and rejoined the church, they even had their marriage redone to make it official again. While they've moved on with their lives, things still aren't entirely normal. My brother-in-law remains on the Sewell predators list, and every once in a while, neighbors or others in the community find out about his past. When that happens, it turns their lives upside down all over again. Story 38. A lot of family secrets were hidden from me, and I've only pieced them together as I've grown older. For one, I found out my parents were divorced when my dad told me he was going to propose to someone I thought was just his friend. I was 7 when they separated, but no one explained why my dad moved out or why my grandma moved in with us. My dad remarried when I was 10, and I had to figure it all out as time went on. Then, when I was a teenager, I pretended to be asleep in the back seat of the car while my mom drove my brother's ex-girlfriend home. That's how I learned that my brother had both gonorrhea and chlamydia. When I was 7, my parents told me our great-grandpa died because of smoking. They wanted to scare us away from cigarettes. Years later, I found out he never smoked and had actually died of prostate cancer. Another time, I learned that my dad had a series of anxiety attacks and breakdowns after my parents' divorce and my great-grandfather's death. Apparently, anxiety runs in our family. I found this out after I started experiencing unexplained anxiety attacks this past summer. Most recently, I told my mom I might need to go on birth control because I had a period that lasted a month straight. That's when she dropped a bombshell. She'd had ovarian cancer but never told us. She only mentioned it then because she wanted me to watch out. My parents hide a lot from me, and I'm left wondering what else I still don't know. Story 39. My father found out he was adopted when I was about 11 years old. My younger siblings overheard and found out that same year. My parents decided it would be a family secret and swore everyone to secrecy. I didn't find out until I was 21, and only because of my own health issues. I'd struggled with unexplained health problems my entire life, and when I was 18, doctors finally nailed down the root cause, a genetic condition. The frustrating part is that it could have been caught when I was 10, but because doctors didn't have the family history from my father's side, they couldn't figure it out in time. For years, doctors asked for my dad's family medical history, and my mom always said it wasn't available. I assumed it was because everyone on his side of the family was dead. I was just a kid. I didn't know any better. After yet another procedure, a doctor casually mentioned something about my father's medical history. On the drive home, I got upset and started arguing with my mom. I yelled about how they must have been able to get files on my dad's side, even if everyone was dead. I told her they put me through a life of pain and endless procedures because they didn't care enough to try. That's when my mom finally snapped and told me the truth. My father was adopted. It turned out they could have found the information. They had his biological mother's name, but my father refused to accept that he was adopted. He saw it as a dishonor because to him, it meant he'd been rejected by his birth family. Because of his stubbornness, he refused to look into his biological family history. As a result, I'm still spending thousands of dollars a year on procedures for a condition that could have been caught years ago. I tried looking into my biological family on my own, hoping to find any other genetic issues that might be relevant for me or any future children. But I ran into dead ends. Whenever I asked for help or advice, people flipped out on me for not respecting my father's wishes, even though I said I'd keep the information to myself. At this point, I guess I just have to hope there's nothing else genetic lurking on his side of the family. Maybe one day after he's gone, I'll finally be able to find the answers I need.